Aloha, my name is Julie Mitchell, and I'm the Executive Director here at Ikahi Mediation Center. We welcome you to our Brown Bag Talk series. Just to let you know a little bit about Ikahi Mediation Center, we were founded in 1983, so we're 39 years old now. We were part of the Hawaii Island YMCA, and then in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. Our mission is to empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options and to find their own best solutions. To achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and trainings like this one to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our Brown Bag Lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon on Zoom, and you need to register each time to get the link. So I will tell you a little bit more about our next one in a minute. I do want to share with you one thing. If you have ever considered learning more about conflict resolution or were interested in what it takes to become a mediator starting this Saturday, so 2 days away, is our basic mediation training. It is a 4-day training over 2 weekends, and it is how our professionally trained volunteer mediators get their start. All the 5 mediation centers in the state, including Ikahi and Maui Mediation Services, which is where Diane is from, have to take this training first, and then they become apprentices and they donate their time to help community members resolve conflicts. And so we are always looking for additional volunteers to learn these skills and join our apprenticeship program, or if for your personal and professional development you might be interested in. We can still accommodate you if you sign up today. So I'm going to put the link to that in our chat as well if you want to take a look. At the end of our talk here today, we are going to ask you to fill out a short online survey, which helps us with grant funding for this free series. And I'll put the link in the chat a couple times toward the end. So if you can just click in on that at the end, we'd appreciate your feedback. And I will send the slide. Well, actually, we're not having slides today. I will be sending you a video link today along with the link to the survey later in case you're not able to click into the link in the chat. We found sometimes people can't do that. If you are enjoying this talk or the past, please feel free to register for more in the future. Our next speaker on April 21st is Sylvia Dolina. She has worked for big companies like Hewlett Packard and Best Buy doing leadership development. She's going to speak on the topic, Show Up Powerfully, Access Your Innate Abilities and Knowledge. And again, I'll put in the chat here the link to register for that if you would like to join us. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, who happens to be a colleague, a personal friend, and someone I also consider a mentor, Diane Petropulos. She holds a master's degree. She is a certified online dispute resolution mediator. She's a member of a federal mediator panel making equal employment opportunity claims and other workplace disputes. Diane is also a former lecturer at the master's level in the Human Resources Management program at UH Manoa. And since 2001, okay, so 21 years now, she has mediated hundreds of court cases on behalf of Maui Mediation Services, where she also serves on their board of directors. Diane, please take it away.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today to learn more about emotional intelligence and, of course, how you can use it for conflict management. So I'd like to begin by taking a look at the biology behind the success or failure of interpersonal communication. So Julie, would you put up our first diagram from the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0? So yes, this is a rudimentary drawing of the brain, and yet this is what I want you to consider as we start talking about how perceptions enter into our brain As you can see from the diagram right there at the spinal cord, that's when perceptions come in, and then they travel along a pathway that's marked with the arrows to the limbic system. And that's the emotional center of our brain. And that's also where our first reactions and feelings take place. If some of you are acquainted with the term the reptilian brain, that's the limbic system. And it's also the source of our first take on a situation that is possibly threatening to us. So the point I want you to think about is it comes in, it sits there in the limbic system, and then it makes its way over to the frontal lobe, that on the diagram, I think rationally, way over here. So what I want you to consider is when I have something come in, approach me, it lands in a very hot spot before it possibly can move to the frontal lobe. So there's a delay there that I hope that you will consider taking advantage of. So we're all hardwired to react instantly to a physical or verbal attack. This is not a choice. That's the fight-flight syndrome. It floods our bloodstream with adrenaline. Heart and muscles ready for action. No need to think, just fight or flee. Anger and fear quickly take over, even though it may be verbal aggression instead of a physical attack. And again, we're hardwired. Your first impulse is to get even by inflicting immediate pain on whoever is causing you pain. Then you say something sarcastic or critical or accusatory that may only make things worse by creating more aggression and conflict. If you're sufficiently provoked, you may often not be able to think at all because the thought process itself fails. Your physical reactions and the range of your emotions influence how you talk and the words you use. So even a moderate amount of physical excitement, read adrenaline, can overwhelm your ability to choose the right words and phrases. And yet, if it is a verbal attack, there's a definite need to think our way through this. It involves learning how to step back long enough to think calmly before responding to the challenge. That's what I meant by that little delay. That's the piece that I want you to take advantage of. Effective communication involves strategic thinking about how to convey our reactions with the most effective and best word choice. Wait long enough for your reaction to clear, and I'm going to use this expression that I think many of you have probably already heard, amygdala hijack, to clear the amygdala hijack area, limbic system, and get to your frontal lobe, where you can modulate your response. And just a note, the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is a very handy reference book if you decide to look it over. And Julie, could you now go to our second image? And this will be the bear and the owl. All right, folks. One of the things that I enjoy about training is that I learn something every time I present. And so I was presenting along these lines, and I started to talk about the limbic system and the frontal lobe. And the folks that are in this particular training said, oh yeah, we call that the bear and the owl. And so I had them explain it to me. And you probably can start to see the gist of it. That first limbic system reaction, that's the bear, that's the snarling, that's the you're hurting me, I'm going to come back at you. And the owl for them represented the frontal lobe, where you've already had a chance, because you've given it just that pause, to be able to formulate your thoughts, think your way through, and then respond appropriately. So I'm going to just encourage you to shun the bear and embrace the owl. All right, Julie, that's all until we get a little further along. Thank you. So the topic of this talk is emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. So how does emotional intelligence fit into this perspective from the biology part of it? Daniel Goleman, Goleman, is the Harvard psychologist who introduced the concepts of emotional intelligence and has published extensively on this brain and behavioral research area. His first book was Emotional Intelligence, and a second book, Working with Emotional Intelligence, which is workplace oriented. So I'm going to start giving you a little description on emotional intelligence. One way to think of it is the ability to identify your own response to a situation, your own emotional response, shift the way you think about it, that's that little delay, and then behave differently than that first impulse of what to say, snapping back at someone. So high emotional intelligence means that you control your choices when you need to respond in the moment to a stressful situation, rather than an amygdala hijack reaction that narrows your flexibility to respond. So Julie, would you please put up that emotional competence framework, the first one. Yeah, good. That helps to be able to see it better. That's good, Julie. Thank you. So this framework, there's a second page, but this framework is personal competence. You see that relates to how we manage ourselves. One section is self-awareness. So emotional awareness, accurate self-assessment, self-confidence. A second area is self-regulation, and that's managing one's internal states, impulses, and resources. So that's self-control, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, adaptability, and innovation. And the third area he has labeled motivation. And these are emotional tendencies that guide or facilitate reaching goals. Achievement drive, commitment, initiative, optimism. So this is fairly academic stuff. This was in the Working with Emotional Intelligence book, but I just wanted you to see the whole range that he discusses. And Julie, could we please go to the next page? Okay, and this is the social competence area. So the first one, of course, was personal. This one, the social competence. These competencies determine how we handle relationships. The first one, and what's a very famous part of emotional intelligence, is empathy, awareness of others' feelings, needs, and concerns. So understanding others, developing others, service orientation, leveraging diversity, and political awareness. And then in the social skills, adeptness inducing desirable responses in others, this is where conflict management sits. So the first one under that, influence, second one, communication, third one, conflict management, negotiating and resolving disagreements. Also included under social skills, leadership, change catalyst, building bonds, collaboration and cooperation, and team capabilities. So if you wanted a whole look at emotional intelligence, that was for your benefit along those lines. Of course, I'm going to focus now on its relationship to conflict management. So thank you, Julie. One of the articles that Daniel Goleman published a couple of years ago, what people still get wrong about emotional intelligence, he really wanted us to think about the confrontations that we need to have or inevitably run into, and to do them more strategically and productively. So he's saying essentially self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. Those are the key pieces from that whole long list that are in play when we're looking at conflict or a confrontation. His comment after that part was, you'll notice that none of these are aligned with niceness. So how do you apply these concepts to handling a conflict or a confrontation? Number one, if you're worried about being walked all over, you might be prone to err too much in the other direction, venting your anger at the person and exacerbating the situation. Another approach, if you are truly conflict averse, you might avoid the confrontation altogether. And here's the answer that we use in the mediation field and frankly in interpersonal communications. Emotional intelligence provides a middle way between these extremes. Strong self-awareness and self-management would let you control your initial impulses or any anxiety you might have around the conversation. A highly developed sense of empathy, and that's part of that social awareness, would allow you to see the situation from the other person's point of view. So you could present your argument in a way that makes them feel heard, or that speaks to their interests as well as your own. And handling conflict is an important part of relationship management. And here's how to encapsulate it. You'd say what you have to say clearly and strongly, and in a way that the other person can feel that they've been heard and listen to you. That's the piece that I want you to keep in mind for how we look at conflict management with emotional intelligence. One other example from Goleman, this is an article that he published. The title is, Emotional Intelligence Has 12 Elements, Which Do You Need to Work On? So he gives an example. A supervisor was strong in conflict management. If she was strong in conflict management, she would be skilled in giving people difficult or unpleasant feedback. Things that they might need to hear, but it's hard for them to hear. And if she were more inclined to influence, she would want to provide that difficult feedback as a way to lead her direct reports and help them grow. For example, she has a peer who is overbearing and abrasive in the workplace. Rather than smoothing over every interaction with a broader balance of emotional intelligence skills, she could bring up the issue to her colleague directly, drawing on emotional self-control to keep her own reactivity at bay while telling him what specifically does not work in his style. Bringing simmering issues to the surface is the core of conflict management. Esther could also draw on influence strategy to explain to her colleague that she wants to see him succeed, and that if he monitored how his style impacted others around him, he would understand how a change would help him and his coworkers. So that's kind of the academic look at emotional intelligence. I want to now start looking at the combination of EQ and conflict management. So I will tell you that my first suggestion is one of the most effective strategies is eliminate blaming from your communications, verbal or written. That's a big one. I'm going to define blaming as responses that convey criticism, and I'm not talking about constructive criticism. I mean being critical of someone without offering anything that helps them understand what the issue is. Accusations, something said to punish someone or to humiliate someone. These are toxic behaviors that inflame the exchange and lead to anger, anxiety, and distrust. Well, thinking back to that first chart, now we're back to the adrenaline and the limbic system in play and not being able to think your way through the conflict. So just in terms of suggestions, thinking your way through the conflict to me means that you select words that convey a neutral, non-reactive attitude, that you're listening with curiosity, and your goal is not to avoid, not to trigger a reactive response. If your words, your facial expressions, or your body language convey disapproval or blame, you'll have to deal with the other person's anger, resentment, or anxiety. You put it out there, you're going to get it back. These negative emotions make every interaction more difficult because if you manage to trigger the amygdala hijack, wow, it's a big, ugly argument. So my suggestion when I'm saying eliminate blaming from your communications, verbal, face-to-face, however, count to 5 before responding, at least. Please think your way through it instead of just, well, I heard that. Here's my snappy reply. And there you go. So here's some suggestions for how to avoid blaming. As you're well aware, effective communication involves the words you choose and how you express them with your nonverbal communication. What's your posture like? What are your gestures like? Facial expressions, of course. Tone of voice. I can say the same sentence 3 different ways, and the tone of voice will change how it's received by the person I'm speaking to. Let me just give you a couple of, I had to chuckle when I read this, so I put it in and want to share it with you. On nonverbals, they are kind of verbal, you can hear them. There's a whole repertoire of snorts, grunts, snarls, sarcastic chuckles, frowns, raised eyebrows, and other ways of conveying disdain or blame. And that, combined with what you've said, leads the other person to view you as an aggressor. And that's the kick again into the limbic system. Nonverbal signals either support or distort the impact of your words. Many of us who mediate know that the nonverbals are kind of the key to what's going on, not more than what's being said specifically. So we look to those signals for our being able to help people through their conflict. So how can you turn counterproductive arguing into problem solving? So I want you to just listen to this as if you might be telling it to yourself. I don't see what you see. I don't hear what you hear. Since we are each different people, we have differing viewpoints. They're not necessarily right or wrong. We just see it from different angles. What's the classic example of seeing things from different perspectives? The water glass. Is it half full? Is it half empty? Neither one of those is right or wrong. I just look at it and I see it this way. And Molly, who's next to me on the squares on Zoom, sees it a different way. And they can both be accommodated. So the first skill I feel in interpersonal communications is listening respectfully to what is being said. Respectful listening, I think it's a willingness to be fully present while someone is talking. No listening gap. Those of us who are acquainted with Dr. Catherine Lampton will be thinking about Catherine and her explanation of the listening gap. Briefly, we can listen to about 150 words a minute. We can process at about 450 words a minute. That's a 300 word per minute gap. And that's where your mind wanders. That's where you're thinking, oh gosh, I have to, or what about, and guess what? The person that is talking to you can tell that your mind has wandered, that you're not fully focused on what they're saying. It's kind of obvious. We think we're disguising it, we're not. So my idea of respectful listening, listen and look like you're listening. So without getting impatient or angry, no grimaces, no frowns. I'm thinking that looking like I'm listening doesn't include, let me just model it for you. Oh yeah, this is my phone. Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree with what. That's rude and disrespectful. If someone's taking the time to talk to you, it seems to me you should have the time to listen to them or set a different time. So listening with your eyes, paying attention to their nonverbal signals, listening with your ears, and an open mind. The number one thing that's going to happen, you are going to have to stop talking. You're going to have to be listening, but not listening in order to interrupt as soon as you see an opening. Listening with full engagement. Give time and space to speak to the other person. Suspend your judgment. Hear it out. Keep an open mind as they explain. And then ask genuinely curious questions. And let me just comment that I like to ask questions first to understand what they're saying. I'm not talking about accusatory questions that try to put them on the defensive. There's really two steps to this process in my mind. It is ask questions first to understand, get clear what they are trying to say. Let them talk and explain so they feel heard. And then hopefully you'll be able to do the same thing by explaining what you want them to understand about your perspective. And the second step is, after both people are clear where they're coming from, then you can do some problem solving. Well, I do agree with you on this and this. That other piece, let's work on that one. That looks like we need to address it. That's a collaborative way to hear the other person out, get your own stuff out there, and then work where you're trying to pull it together. So a second suggestion on how we bring in emotional intelligence, shift away from focusing on blaming a particular person and towards problem solving and solutions. I just gave you what that might look like. Instead of looking for who to blame, focus on working on what the problem is that you need to solve. Blaming a person does not equal problem solving. Accusatory language, putting people on the defensive, and antagonizing zingers are not the best way to manage conflict. I suggest that showing respect and encouraging cooperative problem solving and collaborative work are better ways to resolve differences in a conflict. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. Of all this stuff that I've given you to contemplate, do you have any questions you want to ask at this point? Because I'm going to go into some scenarios, some say this, not that, and I want to give you a chance to check in with me before I start that part of this presentation. Julie, do you see any questions? I don't see any, but I don't have the whole screen in front of me.
I don't see any questions, and the best way to ask a question is if you either just unmute or you use the raise hand feature. So we see you'll pop to the front. I see Elizabeth, you're unmuted and you have a question. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Diane. Thank you for this. It's really interesting. Nice to see you.
Nice
I'm
to see you.
curious to get your thoughts about, does this work all the time and in every situation? And mostly what I'm thinking about right now is something you referred to a while back. When does working with somebody who doesn't want to be collaborative become appeasement when you shouldn't be in an appeasing situation? Thank you very much.
That's a tough question, Elizabeth.
I know, Diane, it's a really tough one, especially because we're thinking about what's going on in the world. And so that's what was going on in my mind when I was listening. Thank you.
So I will, just for opener, say, of course, we have to be thinking about it. Are we thinking on the global scale? Are we thinking about our home life? Or are we thinking about colleagues in the workplace? So those are, each one is a different situation that I think requires a different set of standards or criteria that you will set for yourself as you go through it. But the work comes when you don't get the reaction you expect on the other side, and you still want to pursue it. And I think that's the crux of Elizabeth's question. For me, it's always well, let's see if I can give you an idea of how that sounds to me. And then let's look at it if I even got exactly what you wanted me to understand. So I'm going to start doing a little bit of back and forth clarifying. If they don't want to cooperate, I still am going to ask, well, just give me a hint. I'm going to be very encouraging. I'm kind of thinking workplace here for a moment. So well, I don't want to talk to you about it. All right, I want to respect that. Let's make a promise to each other that we will talk about it. And then I set a time and place, or they do, or we do, so that we don't just go into full-on conflict avoidance, and instead we try our best to actually work on it even more, but at a time when we're prepared and we're trying very hard to keep the self-management and the self-awareness in play. So that's, I guess, one example. I can't answer it on a global scale. Look what's going on. I'm hoping there's a bunch of work going on behind the scenes. I mean, that's where diplomacy is supposed to take place. Do I know that? No, of course not. But I am not very patient in how much I will pursue something with a person that I'm having a conflict with, and I will give them plenty of time to eventually come to a place where they can discuss it, and then we can move on from there. Any other questions? Okay.
I do see one in the chat.
Okay.
From Shonda. It says, why is it so much harder to take a pause before reacting when communicating with family members?
Because it's a hot button. That's great. That's a perfect one. Because of course, there's always somebody in the family over Thanksgiving dinner or whatever that it's going to light it up. Hot buttons, I will just say, are something that I can make a few suggestions about. And one is learn your hot buttons. How do you do that? You ask your friends. You know, I'm trying to figure out what really bothers me. Oh, I can tell you. I know what really bothers you. This, and this. Whenever I say this, you just light up. Your family can tell you. They very much can tell you what your hot buttons are. And trusted coworkers can tell you as well. So my first suggestion is make sure you know, you are aware of your hot buttons. And the next step, of course, is get a plan, figure out the next time someone pushes your hot button, have a plan before that happens for how you will react in a way that isn't overly reactive, isn't the same old, oh, there you go again, saying the same obnoxious thing, when in fact you want to respond in a different way. Having a plan is very useful. Having a scenario that you picture is very useful. So I've taken your question, why is it so? Yes, it's really hard with family, but it's also hard with coworkers, and it's hard with friends. And those are, that idea of a hot button coming up, they don't come up all the time. Sometimes you get caught unawares. And that's why I'm suggesting do a little work, figure out what they are, what your personal hot buttons are, and then get ready when someone pushes it. Because I bet almost everybody on this call would say, well, if I ask you, can you stop the button pusher? No. Can you manage your own emotions? Yes, with a little thought and planning ahead of time. That's the EQ piece that comes along with the hot button. Any other questions?
Let's see here. A question from Carolina, or Carolina, pardon me if I'm not saying that right. Is there a language we can use to expect a more peaceful reaction from a person? Not necessarily manipulate them, but to get a more peaceful result out of it. Get them not to retaliate.
Okay, so that, thank you for the question, because that goes back a little bit to how you put your information out there. And that is where I want you to be as calm, as clear, and as easy to listen to as possible. So that's my idea of a language that works when you're trying to communicate with someone else who's coming from a whole different perspective. They're coming from the other half of the glass of water. Being patient with that, being willing to hear it without facial expression reactions, literally giving them the space, no matter how it strikes you, as not showing how it strikes you, but being willing to let them explain. And then hopefully they're staying at a non-reactive level. And then hopefully they will be able to take a little bit of a page from what you are suggesting and modeling. And maybe it comes back well that way. Is there a very special language? I'm going to give you some language things in these scenarios, but of course they only apply to that very specific scenario. So if you're thinking and your self-awareness is pretty high, I don't think I'll use that word. I think I'll use this word. I bet that won't cause that uproar or outburst. That's what I'm suggesting. Any other questions?
I don't see any other in the chat.
Okay, and thank you for your questions. So I'm going to give you a few scenarios to think about. This first one is workplace related. I can't get my coworker to stop coming into my office for long chats during work hours. So and I'm going to run this one as if I'm the person thinking about it. Somebody comes into my office, they take up a lot of my time, and I'm really starting to need to set some limits. And you don't just set them, but you have to enforce them. So what's my first thing? Well, a subtle hint. I might look at my watch. Not so subtle. I make it very clear that I'm not listening. But those are kind of rude behaviors, and they're kind of conflict avoidant. You're not explaining what's going on. You're just trying to, or hoping that they see that. So I think an explanation, because I want to be generous and kind to my coworkers, I think an explanation is the better way to go. So calm, clear, direct. How the long chats impact my own work. And they walk in my office. Hey, it's great to see you, but I got to warn you, I only got 5 minutes today. Or, hi, good to see you. Really don't have time to talk because I'm on a deadline. We can do it a little later. Is that okay? Good. I don't want to be aggressive, and I don't want to be a doormat. And there's a lot of ways in between. So another way is at the end of 5 minutes, you get up from your chair and you move with them to the door, and clearly, directly, and politely, that's all the time I have today. I just can't spend any more time today talking about this. I've got to get back to this project I'm trying to get at. Wait at the door until they leave. Because otherwise, if you go back to your desk and sit down, they may not leave the office. Another thing you could do is you could close your door and then a small sign that says, please knock before entering. If I'm on a big project, I answer the door by going over to the door, opening it, and not letting the person into the office. Really sorry. I just can't do it today. I don't mind our chats. In fact, I learn a lot from them, can't do it right now. And I have to tell you, this week is pretty jammed up. Next week might be just fine. All of those things are meant to say, I was glad to see you, and now is not the right time. It's not meant to make them feel like they're not a worthwhile person for me to talk with. It's circumstances right now, it doesn't work. And are there any other suggestions from any of you? What have you done if someone comes in and spends a lot of your time chatting, not work related? Have any of you any suggestions for all of us to consider? Nothing else? I can't believe I was that comprehensive, but okay. All
Well,
right.
I can add that if it's a good friend or coworker that you typically do chat with, that you identify a time, whether it's at lunchtime that you catch up, or that there is an after work or something, whatever you do, you already pre-identify this is when you get together, and so they already know that that's the best and only time that you're available.
That's a great suggestion. Make it more specific. Next week, I said next week should be good. Make it, well, Monday, let's get together for lunch, or I'll have some time and will you, because it's both of us needing to be able to clear our schedule. Thank you. So I do want to suggest that there is an important piece to all of this, and that is handle it yourself between you and the coworker. Please don't take it to the supervisor and say, this person is annoying me. They come in and they chat in my office. Please resolve it between the two of you, not taking it to a supervisor. This is something that with the right amount of skill, I feel like you can little by little shift it into what's acceptable to each of you. All right, the next scenario is, it's not me, it's them. So the situation is, you couldn't finish a task on time and your supervisor confronts you. This is the not this example. Notice the name calling and how it pushes it off somewhere else. Well, the jerks in that other department screwed up and didn't leave me enough time to do my part. If I'm the supervisor, I'm wondering why there's name calling going on, but I'm also wondering how did this get to the point where some folks didn't meet deadlines and other folks then couldn't meet their deadlines? So I'm very interested in exploring it. I think the person being confronted by the supervisor should say, yeah, I'm sorry the project was late. Do you have a minute, or is this a good time to discuss how this happened? Because now you're saying there was a problem. You're not saying, oh, it was nothing to do with me. And you want to discuss it and see where the problem solving lies. So that's an example of what not to say and then what you could say. This one is, she's nitpicking my work. You've just started working with a new procedure and your coworker is criticizing your performance. This is the, please don't use this as a response. You know, Jan, that's my coworker, I'm smart enough to figure this out. Get off my back. I have shown that I'm taking negative feedback as a personal attack and responding with aggressive defenses. Well, it came at me that way. That's why I'm probably going to send it back that way. So instead, thanks for the feedback. Can I look it over and get back to you tomorrow? It's saying that you are interested in the feedback. You want to get a sense of it. It may be too hot for you right now for you to discuss it further, or that approach upsets you too much. The next day are you available to discuss it tomorrow? Just want to point out that telling people they are missing the mark is not the same as helping them hit the mark. So here's the next one. I've got all the answers. I noticed that a colleague is not following correct procedure in the office. So the last thing, I hope you never say this to someone, here, let me show you the right way to do that as loudly as possible so everybody else in the office hears it as well. Trying to humiliate someone creates enemies. Please don't do that to your colleagues or your supervisor, your coworkers. I'm going to suggest that there is a way to do this in a respectful way. And that is, if I'm the one that wants to help them change what they're doing, I would say, I see you're working on this. Is there something that I could offer as a suggestion that you would be willing to have us discuss a little bit? Can I offer a suggestion? Would it be okay for me to offer a suggestion? Can I just add something to what you're already working on here that might make it go a little more easily for you? Those are those softening, but inviting it, not avoiding it. Okay, and then a couple just in the personal realm. So this isn't a workplace one, although it could be, especially if you're friends with someone in the workplace that you notice this. What I don't want you to say is, what's wrong with you? You're really grouchy today. Geez, how about a different approach? How about, oh, I'm sorry to see you're feeling grouchy. You're just not yourself. Is there something you want to talk about? Or what happened today? I see you're feeling grouchy. Or the one I like to say to people is, how can I help? I see you're really grouchy. How can I help? And the last thing I have to offer on working with others, interpersonal communication, the wise person avoids arguments over who said what to whom and when. Memory is just not perfect. And I want to leave you with that thought, that if you want to discuss how the next time you don't want to have a miscommunication, that sounds like problem solving. Blaming someone for not remembering who, what, or where is probably not as useful. So I am concluding, and I thank you all for your questions and your attendance.
Thank you so much, Diane. We don't have any more questions in the chat. I did see one comment that someone shared. It said, the audiobook Nonviolent Communication says it's harder with our families because of ingrained patterns of behavior. The info and the 13 steps for managing emotional flashbacks for people with CPTSD are available at a website. So, which helped this person understand why our family makes her react like nobody else and how to manage one's own reactions. So, and then there's another website that talks about people who have low EQ, maybe they don't naturally have empathy and they're able to manipulate others because of that. So in any case, look in the chat, there's some really great messages. There's a lot of saying thank you, this is the best talk I've heard in a while, very informative, and other thank yous. So I'm gonna wrap it up a bit here. Again, I did mention at the beginning that if anyone wanted to join us for basic mediation, which is taught by Diane in a longer session, you would need to sign up today. I know it's kind of last minute. Yes, we will send out a link to the video production. Somebody's asking that. We'll upload it to YouTube and then we will take it from there. I am going to ask that I'm going to put a link to our online survey into the chat. And if you haven't, if you've been on this before, you know, you just click into the link and it's a few quick questions. So if you could start doing that now, that would be great. Next month, I did mention that we have Sylvia Dolina speaking on, wait, we just created this today, the title, so let me get it in my head again. Show up powerfully, access your innate abilities and knowledge. I want to thank everyone for coming today. If you need to leave right on time at 1, great. Do take a minute or two to fill out our survey. It does help us with our funding for the series. The link is in the chat. Do check your emails in the next few days. I will give you the slide, not the slides, the video link. And then we have a couple questions that I'm going to go to here for you, Diane. Caillou is asking, what if you ask to offer a suggestion and they do not want your suggestion, but it's your job as a supervisor to convey important info that they may have missed?
Okay, so part of that scenario was that it was in the open with lots of people able to overhear it. So the very first thing is, if you have someone who really doesn't want to discuss it very much, then immediately get into a private space and then decide how you're going to go from there. And it may simply mean they need some time to cool off. They were upset by it not working very well. And remember, you're praising in public and you're coping with things that are not going well in private. So that's my answer to that. And the other one, Julie?
Okay, the other question is, why don't, oh, this is specifically for mediators. Why don't mediators remind people to take their time answering the questions so they don't get that snappy response?
I guess my answer is that I often do ask people, well, I kind of set up the question so that please take your time, think your way through it, and then let me know what your thinking is, so that if it's going to be, if I think it's going to be snarky, snappy, whatever, I will do that ahead of time and help them feel more comfortable, because it seems to me that mediators, our first task is to make the folks more comfortable so that they can think their way through things. So I will set it up ahead of time, yes. Any other questions?
I do not see any. Well, let's see, wait, one more message just came in. This is a private message, so I think that we'll leave it at that. Can everybody please give the virtual round of applause that one gives on Zoom? You know, people often.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. A lot of people are mute, but I can see people with the little hand clapping symbols and the thumbs up. So we really appreciate your time here today, Diane. We will send the link for the video out. Please do fill out the survey, even by clicking into the link in the chat or with the email you'll get in the next couple days. And we will see you next time, next month.
Thank you all.